Thank you for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, Israel planning its next move against Hamas after President Joe Biden traveled to Jerusalem amid concerns that at least some of the $100 million in humanitarian aid promised by the president may end up going to Hamas. We'll get reaction from the Israelis to the president's meetings in Israel. Anti-Semitism growing on college campuses here in the United States. We're going to take a look at how deeply it has infected American universities and the backlash against it. The war in Israel has become a line of division among Republican presidential candidates. We're going to take a look at where the top contenders stand and what they're saying. And what about the Christians in Gaza? We're going to look at their plight and why they may not be able to flee to the United States. All those stories and more today, right here on CBN NewsWatch.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
Let's begin this half hour in Israel, where leaders are focusing on the next step in their attacks on Hamas after the Israeli government provided evidence it did not strike that hospital in Gaza, and after the visit from President Biden. And as Chris Mitchell reports now from Jerusalem, there are concerns the U.S. humanitarian aid promised by the president may in fact go to Hamas.
On his way home from Israel, President Biden said Egypt's president agreed to open the Gaza border for humanitarian aid. Before he left Israel, Biden pledged $100 million to Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank.
Let me be clear. If Hamas diverts or steals the assistance, they will have demonstrated once again that they have no concern for the welfare of the Palestinian people. And it will end. As a practical matter, it will stop the international community from being able to provide this aid.
Republican Senator Rick Scott criticized the president's decision.
We've got a president that wants to give money to Gazans? Give me a break. And by the way, go look at the videos. There's pictures of these terrorists with humanitarian first aid kits. There's pictures all over Israeli press about these rice bags with bullets in it, right? So this is a humanitarian effort, right? So there's no way that Hamas doesn't get this money. This is stupid.
The president also pledged unprecedented support package for Israel's defense. Following President Biden's visit, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with his war cabinet as the IDF continues to strike Hamas terrorists and its infrastructure in the Gaza Strip. Netanyahu also addressed the plight of the hostages that now stands officially at 203.
Regarding the abductees, I clarified three things to President Biden. First, I demand the return of all abductees, and we are working together to return them in any way possible. Second, until they are returned, we demand visits by the Red Cross to our abductees. Third, we will not allow humanitarian aid of food and medicine from our territory to the Gaza Strip.
The Prime Minister also said he presented conclusive evidence that Israel did not strike the hospital in Gaza. The White House National Security Council released its own analysis saying, quote, "Our current assessment is that Israel is not responsible for the explosion at the hospital in Gaza." On Thursday, the IDF produced more visual evidence that the explosion at the hospital in Gaza was the result of a failed rocket fired by Islamic Jihad. The IDF says all the information coming out of Gaza is controlled by Hamas.
Last night, when Hamas announced that Israel attacked a hospital in Gaza, too many people around the world not only believed them, but amplified Hamas lies. Open your eyes and see the true face of Hamas.
Despite Israel's evidence, news of the hospital strike sparked violent protests at the U.S. Embassy in Beirut, the West Bank, and in other cities. The UK's Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, arrived Thursday to show support for Israel, while Iran's president called for nations to sever ties with the Jewish state.
Chris joins us now from Jerusalem. So, Chris, what is the reaction in Israel after the president's visit?
Well, Ephraim, I would say it's a mixed reaction right now based on the fact that what is this going to do for Israel going forward? For example, some of the analysis that I've heard from some Israeli journalists are saying that Israel won't be able to go and have a preemptive strike against Hezbollah. That's very serious. Also, maybe it cannot occupy the Gaza Strip after any military occupation. And also, warned against harming civilians. But that's exactly what Israel is trying to do all over this conflict. And also, Biden forced the introduction of the humanitarian aid that we talked about in our report. These are all things that seem to be, to an Israeli perspective, sort of tying the hands and trying to control and manage what Israel can or can't do. And one Israeli journalist told me, sort of summed it up this way: it really blocked a way for Israel to have an unequivocal victory. And this is very important in this part of the region. If Israel is not allowed to go ahead and destroy Hamas and its infrastructure after the horror that happened on October 7th, that's going to really send a signal to so many of its enemies in the region, Hezbollah, and most of all, Iran. So I would say a mixed picture. They certainly appreciate the military aid, the 2 aircraft carrier groups in the region, and certainly the diplomatic support. But on the other hand, they wonder if it is going to tie the hands of Israel too much, as it really faces, to some Israelis, an existential threat.
What more can you tell us about the concerns U.S. humanitarian aid will end up going to Hamas?
Well, Ephraim, everything is controlled by Hamas in the Gaza Strip, even down in the south. So we reported the other day that even UNRWA, one of the UN groups, Hamas came and they stole their food and fuel. So the fact that humanitarian aid is going in certainly sounds great to the people that really are suffering, that need food and water and maybe lodging and help with tents. But it remains to be seen if that humanitarian aid is going to be commandeered, stolen by Hamas for its own goals.
Is the Israeli government upset with the United States and international media for running with Hamas's version of the rocket attack at that hospital in Gaza and possibly inflaming anger in Arab countries?
Yes, they are. I mean, a lot of media just ran with the story that there was an Israeli attack, or maybe maybe not deliberate, but and unintentional. But yes, much of the media, many people went on social media and ran with that story. Somebody told me this morning that in Italy there were millions of hits on Twitter or X, and yet when the truth came out that it wasn't an Israeli strike, then maybe 100,000 hits about what actually happened. So a lot of people see, and it seems predictable, Ephraim, this has happened before, where some things happen like this. Hamas blames Israel, and people run with that. Yes, they're upset about the international media, and the BBC in particular. The president of Israel is chiding them for not calling Hamas terrorists.
What's the status of Israel's ground invasion into Gaza? Is it still scheduled, or is it on hold for now?
It seems to be on hold right now. I talked to a military expert last night, and I said, what's the delay? And he said, well, there's no delay. It's all part of the plan. I'm not sure how much he knows about what's going to happen, but it does seem like the ground incursion was on its way several days ago. We were down on the southern border last Saturday. We saw a number of tanks and APCs, artillery ready to launch an invasion, but we'll see what happens when it's going to happen and how much they're going to go into the Gaza Strip.
Chris, what's the view there of how the Biden administration is dealing with Iran?
Well, that's a huge question, Iran, and I think that that's sort of maybe the #1 issue, even though the focus right now is all on Hamas and the Gaza Strip and also in the northern border. But it's Iran that is really the head of the snake and really behind Hamas's involvement in this horrible attack by rearming and equipping Hezbollah. How they're going to be able to go against Iran remains to be seen, but it may be symbolic. But yesterday there was an expiration of the sanctions against Iran's ballistic missile program that sort of frees them up to get ballistic missiles and parts. Symbolic, but a very serious point to be made that Iran is behind all of this going on in the Middle East.
Our CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell from Jerusalem. Thank you so much, Chris, and continue to stay safe. Here at home, the latest FBI data shows anti-Jewish hate crimes jumped 36% from 2021 to 2022. Campus rallies celebrating the Hamas atrocities reveal how deeply anti-Semitism has infected many of America's colleges and universities. CBN's Dale Hurd is on that story.
After the horrific Hamas attack on Israel, students at the University of Wisconsin-Madison chanted, "Glory to the martyrs."
Glory to the martyrs!
Cornell University professor Russell Rickford called the Hamas killings exhilarating.
It was exhilarating, it was energizing.
And an instructor at Stanford has been suspended for allegedly making Jewish students stand in a corner while publicly referring to them as colonizers. Many colleges and universities have allowed and even promoted pro-Hamas, anti-Jewish hatred for decades. The attack on Israel has shown just where that policy has led. Dr. Zachary Marshall is editor-in-chief at Campus Reform.
What we're seeing this week on college campuses is a culmination of 2 generations of activist scholars using college classrooms to create indoctrination camps where they use leftist ideology and anti-Israel critiques and work as a mask to perpetuate anti-Semitism.
The anti-Israel BDS movement, which stands for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, has been allowed to flourish on campuses nationwide and uses the chant "From the river to the sea" in their protest, calling for the destruction of Israel.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free!
After the Hamas attack on Israel, the BDS movement's website posted and later deleted that it supported the slaughter of Israelis by Hamas, calling it heroic and justified.
And not only is it a moral failing and an intellectual failing and just a scandal, but it's a strategic threat to the American Republic.
Dexter Van Zyl of Middle East Forum says the Hamas terror attack finally exposed the BDS movement for what it's really about, the destruction of the State of Israel.
It's been a long time coming, and the October 7th attack exposed it.
We support the Intifada!
The major campus group behind the BDS movement is Students for Justice in Palestine. After the Hamas attack, Boston University's SJP chapter posted that victory is ours. Universities like Harvard have been embarrassed and lost donations because of pro-Hamas support. It's gotten so bad that Ezekiel Emanuel, longtime Democrat and brother of Rahm Emanuel, wrote an editorial in Wednesday's New York Times entitled "The Moral Deficiencies of a Liberal Education."
It's terrifying and sad that it took the death of over 1,000 Jews in Israel to direct people to the totalitarian forces that are now, running amok on college campuses in the United States. But that's what it took.
Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Coming up, the war in Iran is also dividing Republican presidential candidates. We're going to take a look at what the top contenders have to say. When we come back, stay with us.
Download the CBN News app. One place for all of your news. Breaking news alerts. Watch CBN News Channel Live. CBN News, because truth matters. Get the CBN News app today.
The war between Israel and Hamas is shining a light on a division among Republicans running for president on the question of how far America should go in supporting Israel. CBN's chief political analyst David Brody brings us this story.
When the war in Ukraine began, so did a philosophical divide in the GOP. The traditional conservative wing supported financial and military support, while the more populist isolationist wing sought to steer clear of the conflict. Now, following Hamas's wave of terror against Israel, the divide still shows up, but not as clear-cut. Each candidate agrees Israelis have the right to defend themselves, they should receive diplomatic support, and that President Biden's policies enabled the attack.
The Israeli attack was made because we are perceived as being weak and ineffective and with a really weak leader.
The Iranians are funding Hamas and Hezbollah and all these groups, and they're funding it in part with money that they've gotten because of the Biden administration's weak policies.
The division begins to take shape over how far America should go. Nikki Haley has been the most outspoken in that regard.
This is not just an attack on Israel. This is an attack on America because they hate us just as much. And I'll say this to Prime Minister Netanyahu, finish them. Finish them. Hamas did this. You know Iran's behind it. Finish them. They should have hell to pay for what they've just done.
Upstart populist Vivek Ramaswamy, however, sees that language as warmongering rhetoric.
She's representative of a broader wing of the Republican Party. The Lindsey Graham, John Bolton, Chris Christie, Mike Pence, Nikki Haley wing of the party that is trying to bring back an era, a bygone era for now, of disastrous U.S. Middle Eastern engagement, almost as though they're salivating over the opportunity to go to war again.
Former Vice President Mike Pence has used the war against Israel to accuse Ramaswamy, Ron DeSantis, and former President Trump as voices of appeasement, as he calls them, when it comes to foreign conflicts like this.
If Mike Pence wants to blame me for what's happening, I think that most people would just laugh at that. What a joke.
Leader of the pack, former President Trump, as you might expect, marches to the beat of his own drum. While he has fully supported Israel, Trump's drawn criticism from rivals for calling Hezbollah very smart.
And they said, gee, I hope Hezbollah doesn't attack from the north because that's the most vulnerable spot. I said, wait a minute. You know, Hezbollah is very smart. They're all very smart. The press doesn't like when they say it.
He also criticized Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, saying he didn't join forces with Trump to help take out a top Iranian terrorist.
I'll never forget that Bibi Netanyahu let us down. That was a very terrible thing. I will say that.
That led Mike Pence to pounce.
Look, all of this is out of place in this moment, and it's reckless and irresponsible for former President Trump or any American leader to send any message other than full and unconditional support to Israel.
And as the war in Israel potentially expands, the political fighting inside the GOP will heat up even more, especially if Iran gets involved. At that point, the divisions over what to do next in support of Israel could deepen even further. David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
Still ahead, while the headlines focus on the fighting in Gaza, we are hearing very little about Christians who live there. We're going to take a look at the difficulties they're facing and why Palestinian Christians may have a tough time getting into the United States. We've got that story for you coming up right up next here on CBN NewsWatch. A bill proposed in Congress will prevent anyone from holding a Palestinian passport from coming into the United States. If the legislation advances and exceptions aren't made, it would also prevent Palestinian Christians from entering the U.S. On this week's episode of The Global Lane, Open Doors USA CEO Ryan Brown tells of the plight of the tiny Christian community in Gaza.
They are, in essence, sheltering in place in a couple of locations there and praying for safety.
Well, even without rockets and bombs falling, I know they've suffered living under Hamas and Islam. So tell us what it's been like for Christians of all denominations there in Gaza.
The situation in Gaza, it is horrific. We are seeing this play out in real time in front of us. And information very, very difficult to get. And to be completely honest, it's, for many of the believers there are some very real security issues as far as, needing to keep somewhat covert as it relates to the presence that they have in those areas. And so, it's definitely something that we need to continue to be lifting up in prayer because that situation is just unfolding in front of our eyes in just horrific fashion.
It's really difficult for them. They're between a rock and a hard place because if they're too friendly to the Israelis, they're accused by Hamas of being Israeli spies or agents. If they're too close to Hamas, and the Israelis claim they're part of Hamas, so it's really difficult for them. They're really in a tough spot, are they not?
It absolutely is. Absolutely is. And that's where I think that, we as believers in the West certainly need to be lifting them up, because very, very difficult, I think, for us to fully comprehend just the realities that they are living in, we're living in prior to, and continue to live in today as these tensions just continue to escalate and spin out of control.
And Ryan, it isn't only Palestinian Christians, but other persecuted Christians seeking refugee status and asylum in the U.S. are also having difficulties getting in. So tell us what Open Doors U.S. Found in your recent study in partnership with World Relief.
Persecution has risen exponentially over the last few years. There are, well over 300 million believers around the globe living in persecution, and much of that would be identified as extreme persecution. Meanwhile, as far as the U.S. and its ability or willingness to receive Christian refugees, those numbers have continued to decline over recent years. When you take those two trends and put those side by side, it is a very, very difficult situation that many Christians find themselves in around the globe.
Okay, Ryan Brown, Open Doors U.S. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
You can hear more about these issues from Ryan Brown on this week's episode of The Global Lane. Also on this week's program, the Gaza war security threat inside the United States and the domino revival, how God brings light and miracles to New York City. You can catch it all in The Global Lane. It begins tonight on the CBN News Channel at 8 Eastern. You can also see it on the CBN News app, or you can find it on YouTube. We'll be encouraging word for your day. Stay with us.
Daily Quick Start from CBN News. A quick read on the important news of the day delivered right to your inbox. Stay current on breaking news, politics, and entertainment. Go to quickstart.news and subscribe today.
Time now for your Thursday Thankful. I invite you to join me in this prayer of gratitude. God, thank you for the love you shower upon my heart. May it be fertile soil to grow love and show it to others. Let that be your prayer today as well. Receive love to give love, and it will be an ongoing cycle. Well, that is going to do it for this edition of CBN News Watch. You can always find more of our news programs on the CBN News Channel at any time, as well as online at cbnnews.com. Let us know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can email us, newswatch@cbn.com. And of course, you can always reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hope you'll join us right back here next time. Make it a great day.